My hands were shaking when I found out what my mother had been doing to my children. 3 years. For 3 full years, she had been poisoning them, and I hadn't noticed a thing. But the real shock came when I discovered why she did it. That reason haunts me every single night, creeping into my dreams and turning them into nightmares I can't escape. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in late September. The leaves were just beginning to turn that deep orange color that always reminded me of childhood, of jumping in leaf piles, of simpler times when I still believed my mother was incapable of hurting anyone. There was that crisp feeling in the air that always made me think of fresh starts and pumpkin spice lattes and cozy sweaters. I was picking up my daughter Emma from my mom's house, same as I'd done every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 3 years without missing a single week. Mom loved watching the kids. Or so I thought. She'd volunteer every week, calling me on Monday nights to confirm, insisting that she treasured this time with her grandchildren more than anything else in the world. She'd tell me how empty her life felt without them, how these visits were the highlight of her week, how she lived for those moments. Emma was 7 years old, with dark curly hair like mine and her father's green eyes. Lucas was 5, blonde and blue-eyed, quiet and thoughtful in ways that sometimes worried me. They adored their grandmother with the kind of pure, uncomplicated love that only children can give. She baked cookies with them, read them stories for hours in her reading nook, took them to the park down the street, let them paint messy watercolors in her art room, taught them how to garden and identify different flowers. She was patient in ways I sometimes wasn't, creative and fun and endlessly engaging. She was the perfect grandma, the kind other mothers envied me for having, the kind who made Pinterest-worthy crafts and never complained about sticky fingers or spilled juice. But that Tuesday, something changed. Something broke. Emma threw up in the car before we even made it out of my mother's neighborhood, while we were still just 2 houses down from Grandma's perfectly manicured lawn. Twice. Violent, painful retching that seemed to tear through her small body and leave her gasping and crying. Her face was pale, almost green, with a grayish tint around her mouth that terrified me. She clutched her stomach like something was tearing her apart from the inside, her small fingers digging into her own flesh. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing with the sweat on her forehead, and she kept whimpering that it hurt so bad. "Mommy, it hurts so bad. Make it stop. Please, make it stop." Lucas, my quiet boy, he just stared out the window at nothing, his face expressionless. He was too quiet, too still. His usual chatter about what they'd done, what they'd played, what stories Grandma had read, what cookies they'd decorated, it was completely absent. He just sat there, small and motionless in his booster seat, his eyes unfocused like he was somewhere else entirely, somewhere I couldn't reach him no matter how many times I said his name. This wasn't the first time this had happened. Emma had been getting sick after visiting my mother for months now, maybe longer, if I was being honest with myself. I'd started keeping a mental tally without really meaning to, the way mothers do when something feels off but you can't quite name it, can't quite put your finger on what's wrong. The pediatrician, Dr. Morrison, had said it was a sensitive stomach when I'd brought it up at her last checkup. Anxiety, maybe, he'd suggested. Growing pains. Some kids just have delicate digestive systems, he'd said with that patronizing smile doctors give when they think you're being an overprotective, slightly hysterical mom who sees problems where there aren't any. I believed him because I wanted to. Because the alternative, the thing I couldn't even let myself think about, was too horrible to contemplate, too impossible, too much like something from a horror movie, not real life. I took Emma home that afternoon, carried her inside because her legs felt too shaky to walk, gave her saltine crackers and ginger ale, and she fell asleep on the couch within 20 minutes, her small body finally relaxing after whatever storm had passed through her. Her breathing evened out. The color slowly returned to her cheeks. That's when I noticed something strange. In her backpack, the purple one with the unicorn patch she'd picked out herself, wrapped carefully in a napkin, was half a cookie. One of Grandma's famous chocolate chip cookies, the ones she'd been making since I was a child myself, the recipe she'd inherited from her own mother. I almost threw it away. My hand was literally hovering over the trash can, ready to toss it. But something stopped me. A feeling. An instinct I'd been ignoring for too long, pushing down every time it tried to surface, every time it whispered that something wasn't right. The cookie smelled off. Not rotten, not moldy, nothing that obvious, just wrong. Like almonds mixed with something chemical, something sharp and artificial that didn't belong in food meant for children, something that made my nose wrinkle and my stomach turn. I put it in a Ziploc bag and hid it in the back of the freezer, buried behind the frozen peas and the ice packs we never used and the forgotten containers of leftover soup. I didn't know why. Not yet. But some part of me knew I needed to keep it. Some part of me was already beginning to understand, even if I wasn't ready to admit it to myself. The next morning, Wednesday, Emma woke up feeling better. Her color had returned. Her energy was back. She wanted breakfast. But Lucas complained about his head hurting. Again, he'd been having headaches for over a year now, maybe closer to 18 months. Terrible ones that made him cry and hold his head in his small hands like it might split open, like his skull was too small for his brain. We'd seen specialists, 3 different pediatric neurologists at different hospitals. We'd had CT scans done, MRIs, blood work, every test imaginable. Nothing ever showed up. The doctors said he was fine, just stressed. But what 5-year-old is stressed? I kept asking myself that question, but I never found an answer that satisfied me or made any sense. Thursday came around like it always did. My mother called at exactly 9 in the morning, punctual as always, cheerful as ever, asking if the kids were coming over. Her voice had that bright, expectant quality it always did on visit days, that slight excitement that had always made me feel good about leaving my children with her. I hesitated. For the first time in 3 years of this routine, I hesitated. The words stuck in my throat like I was choking on them. Emma heard me on the phone from where she was eating her cereal at the kitchen table, and she started crying. Not just tearing up, but full sobbing, the kind that shook her whole body. She clutched my leg and begged not to go. She said her tummy still felt weird, that she didn't want Grandma's cookies, that she wanted to stay home with me, that she didn't want to go there anymore. She'd never done that before. Never. She loved Grandma's house. Loved the toys my mother kept just for them in the special playroom. The garden where they could dig and plant and get dirty. The special treats that were always waiting on the kitchen counter. I told my mother the kids were sick. Both of them. She sounded disappointed, but there was something else in her voice too. Almost angry. There was an edge to her tone I'd never heard before. Something sharp and hard beneath the sweetness. "You're keeping them from me," she said, her words tight and controlled, measured. "I barely see them anymore." That wasn't true. That was completely false. She saw them twice a week, every single week, without fail, for hours at a time. But the way she said it, like I was the villain in some story she'd constructed in her head, it made my skin crawl. It made me feel guilty and defensive and angry all at once. It made me feel like I was doing something wrong by protecting my own children. That weekend, Saturday afternoon, while James was at the hardware store and the kids were watching cartoons in the living room, I did something I'd never done before. I went through my phone, scrolling back through 3 years of text messages with my mother, 3 years of photos and calendar entries and appointment reminders. I was looking for something, anything, that would explain this feeling in my gut, this sensation that something was fundamentally, deeply wrong. And I found it. Patterns. Clear, undeniable patterns that I'd been too blind or too trusting to see before. Every single time the kids visited her, Emma got sick within hours of coming home. Every single time Lucas spent the afternoon there, he'd have nightmares that night, waking up screaming and crying, or he'd wake up the next morning with a splitting headache. Every time they ate her special cookies, or her homemade soup, or her fruit smoothies, or her secret recipe mac and cheese, They'd come home changed, quieter, paler, wrong. Off in ways I couldn't quite articulate but could feel deep in my bones. I'd dismissed it as coincidence for so long. Kids get sick, right? Kids have bad dreams. Kids go through phases. That's what everyone had told me. That's what the doctors had said. But it wasn't random. It was constant, predictable, scheduled, like clockwork. My children would leave my mother's house damaged in small ways that I'd taught myself not to see, that I'd explained away because seeing the truth was too terrifying. I called my best friend Rachel that night after James had gone to bed. After I'd checked on the kids 3 times to make sure they were breathing, still alive, still okay. I told her everything, my voice shaking so badly I could barely get the words out coherently. She went silent for a long time, and I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could hear her dog barking in the background. Then she said the words I'd been too afraid to say out loud, the words that made it real. "Sarah, you need to test that cookie. You need to know what's in it. You need to know for sure." Monday morning, I took the cookie to a private lab across town, one I found online after hours of research, one that specialized in toxicology screening and forensic analysis. I paid extra for rush results, nearly $300. The woman behind the counter, middle-aged with kind eyes, looked at me like I was paranoid, like I was one of those conspiracy theory mothers who sees danger everywhere and wraps her children in bubble wrap. But she took the sample anyway, didn't ask questions, printed me a receipt, and told me I'd have results in 48 hours maximum. I didn't tell my husband, James. Not yet. I couldn't. He worshipped my mother, thought she was the best thing that had ever happened to our family. She'd helped us when Lucas was born, stayed with us for 3 weeks, cooked every meal, cleaned our house top to bottom, did our laundry, told us we were doing everything right when we felt like failures. He thought she was a saint, a blessing, the best grandmother any child could ask for. How could I tell him I suspected her of something so monstrous, so unthinkable, without proof? He'd think I'd lost my mind. He'd think I was having some kind of breakdown. The results came back on Wednesday afternoon at 2:17. I remember the exact time because I was sitting in my car in the lab parking lot, watching the clock, refreshing my email every 30 seconds. When the notification finally came, my heart stopped. My vision blurred. My hands started trembling so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I read the report 3 times before I could breathe again, before I could process what I was seeing in black and white on that screen. The cookie contained ethylene glycol, antifreeze. Not a lot, the report specified. Just enough to make a small child sick. Just enough to cause vomiting, headaches, dizziness, confusion, abdominal pain. Just enough to hurt them without killing them outright. Yet, the report noted that repeated exposure in small doses could cause cumulative damage to kidneys, liver, and neurological systems, especially in developing children. It noted that the symptoms would mimic common childhood illnesses, making detection difficult. It noted that this was consistent with intentional poisoning. I sat there for an hour, maybe more, staring at nothing. Cars came and went around me. People walked past with shopping bags and coffee cups. The world kept moving while mine had completely stopped, while everything I thought I knew crumbled into dust. Then I drove to my mother's house. I don't remember the drive. I don't remember making the decision to go. I don't remember parking or walking up the driveway. I just remember suddenly being there, standing in her garden, my feet on the stone path she'd laid herself last summer. She was pruning her roses, the yellow ones she'd planted when I was born, wearing her wide-brimmed sun hat and her gardening gloves, humming something soft and melodic. A hymn, maybe. She looked so normal, so peaceful, so much like the grandmother I'd always known, the one who'd braided my hair and taught me to ride a bike and held me when my first boyfriend broke my heart. She smiled when she saw me, that same warm smile I'd known my whole life, the smile that had comforted me through every disappointment and celebrated every victory. "Sarah, sweetheart, where are my babies? I've missed them so much." Her voice was honey sweet, genuinely happy to see me, genuinely confused about why I'd come alone. I walked right up to her, each step feeling like I was walking through concrete, phone in my hand, lab results glowing on the screen in the afternoon sunlight. I showed her, held it up to her face, watched her closely, waited for shock, for denial, for horror, for confusion, for the reaction any normal person would have when accused of poisoning children. But she didn't look surprised. She didn't gasp or cry out or demand to know what I was talking about or insist there must be some mistake. She looked caught, trapped, resigned. There's a difference, a profound difference, and I saw it clearly in her eyes, in the way her shoulders slumped slightly, in the way her smile faded into something harder. "You've been poisoning my children," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was cold, flat, dead, emotionless. The voice of someone whose entire reality had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Someone who was holding themselves together through sheer force of will. She put down her gardening shears carefully, methodically, like she had all the time in the world, like this was a normal conversation we were having. She took off her gloves one finger at a time, slowly and deliberately, folded them neatly, and placed them on the garden bench where she always sat to admire her work. Then she looked me straight in the eye, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before, something I'd never imagined could be there, something hard and unyielding and absolutely certain of its own rightness. "Not poisoning," she said calmly, her voice steady and rational and terrifyingly sane. "Teaching. Teaching." That single word hung in the air like smoke, like poison itself, suffocating me. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed completely. My brain couldn't process what I was hearing, couldn't make sense of it. She kept going, her voice steady and measured, like she was explaining something obvious that I was too foolish or too naive to understand on my own. "You were too soft with them, Sarah. Too gentle. Too permissive. Too worried about their feelings and their comfort. Those children needed to understand that the world is cruel. That people will hurt them. That trust is dangerous. That pain is inevitable. I was preparing them, building their tolerance, making them strong enough to survive what's coming, to survive a world that will show them no mercy. You were raising them to be victims, to be weak, to be prey. I was raising them to be survivors, to be strong, to be ready." I felt my knees buckle, felt the strength leave my legs, but I didn't fall. Some part of me refused to fall in front of her, refused to show that weakness. I stood there, locked in place by pure shock, by horror so complete and overwhelming it paralyzed every muscle in my body. This was my mother, the woman who'd sung me lullabies when I couldn't sleep, who'd bandaged my scraped knees with cartoon band-aids, who'd held me when I cried over my first heartbreak and told me I was beautiful and worthy of love, who'd taught me to braid my hair and bake bread and believe in myself. And she'd been systematically poisoning my children because she thought it would make them stronger, because she thought slow suffering was a gift. "You're insane," I whispered. It was all I could manage, all my mind could form into words. She laughed, actually laughed, a soft, sad sound that made my blood run cold, that made every hair on my body stand on end. "I'm practical. I'm realistic. Your father did the same to you when you were little. Small doses, controlled exposure. You survived, didn't you? You're strong because of it. You're resilient. You don't trust easily. You question everything. You can handle pain. That's because of what we did. That's because we loved you enough to prepare you." The world tilted, spun. The garden blurred around me. My father had died when I was 12 years old. Liver cancer, they said. Sudden and aggressive and unstoppable. But now I wondered. Now I questioned everything. Had she killed him too? Had she been poisoning him as well, for years, and it finally caught up with him? How long had she been doing this? Was this some kind of family tradition? Some sick legacy passed down through generations of damaged, twisted women who confused abuse with love? I backed away from her, stumbling slightly, fumbling for my phone with shaking hands, and called 911. My fingers could barely hit the right numbers. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't run or make excuses or beg me not to or try to explain further. She just stood there, watching me with that sad, disappointed expression, like I was the one who'd failed her, like I was the one who didn't understand what love really meant, what sacrifices it required. The police came within 10 minutes. 2 squad cars, lights flashing. The neighbors started coming out onto their porches, watching. I gave the officers the lab results, showed them the messages on my phone, the patterns I'd documented, explained everything in a voice that kept breaking and starting over, that didn't sound like my own. They arrested her right there in her garden, still wearing her sun hat, her hands still dirty from the soil she'd been tending. They put handcuffs on her wrists, read her rights. She didn't resist. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me one last time with those disappointed eyes, and I felt like I was the criminal. The neighbors watched from their windows, from their yards, curtains twitching, phones out, recording. I didn't care. Let them watch. Let them see. Let them know what kind of monster had been living on their perfect street, baking cookies for their children at block parties, hosting garden tours, volunteering at the library. James came home from work 3 hours later to find me sitting on the floor of our living room. Emma and Lucas wrapped in my arms, all 3 of us crying. I told him everything, every terrible detail, every horrifying truth. He didn't believe me at first, shook his head, called me paranoid, said I was overreacting, that there had to be some mistake, some misunderstanding. Then I showed him the lab results. I watched his face crumble, watched the color drain from his skin, watched him age 10 years in 10 seconds, watched the man I loved break into pieces. She watched our kids, he kept saying, over and over like a broken record, like he couldn't process anything else. We trusted her. I trusted her. I left them alone with her. I encouraged you to let her watch them more. Oh God, Sarah, I pushed you to let her take them overnight sometimes. The investigation moved faster than I expected. They searched her house that same night with a warrant, and they found everything. Every piece of evidence I'd been too afraid to look for. Bottles of antifreeze hidden in her pantry, tucked behind baking supplies, mixed with vanilla extract so it would smell sweet and harmless. Small bottles, carefully labeled as baking supplies or cleaning supplies. They found detailed journals, leather-bound notebooks filled with pages and pages of notes about dosages, about symptoms, about how much the kids could handle before it became dangerous, before it would cause permanent damage. She'd been tracking their reactions like a scientist conducting a meticulous experiment. Clinical observations of their suffering, temperature readings, symptom progressions, recovery times. And then they found the letters. Dozens of letters she'd written to me but never sent, stored in a decorative box in her closet, tied with ribbon like love letters. In them, she explained everything in excruciating, horrifying detail. How she'd grown up in a house where her own mother had done the same thing to her and her siblings, to all 5 of them. How it was tradition, passed down through the women in our family for generations, going back to her grandmother and beyond. How it was love, the truest form of love, because it prepared children for a world that would show them no mercy, that would break them if they weren't ready. How suffering built character and weakness had to be beaten out of children, burned out of them, poisoned out of them, before the world did it in crueler, more permanent ways. She wrote about her philosophy of parenting in detail, about survival of the fittest, about how modern parents were creating a generation of soft, useless children who would collapse at the first sign of real hardship, who would never survive what was coming. She quoted philosophers, evolutionary biologists, self-help gurus. She'd built an entire ideology around torturing children. She called it conditioning, inoculation against pain, Preparation for reality. I called it torture. Systematic abuse disguised as tough love. Child abuse dressed up in the language of care. The trial was brutal and public and humiliating. Every detail splashed across local news, then picked up nationally. My mother's lawyer, a slick young man in expensive suits, tried to paint her as a confused old woman, suffering from delusions and early onset dementia, trying to help in her own misguided way, mentally ill and not responsible for her actions. But the evidence was overwhelming and damning. The journals showing years of planning, the chemicals, the detailed notes, the medical records showing Emma and Lucas's repeated illnesses that stopped completely, immediately, the moment they stopped visiting her. Not a single incident after that last Tuesday. The letters outlining her entire methodology, her beliefs, her justifications. The prosecutor brought in experts who explained in devastating detail how small doses of ethylene glycol could cause the exact symptoms my children had been experiencing. How prolonged exposure could have led to permanent organ damage or death within another year, maybe less. How my mother had been walking a razor-thin line between making them sick enough to suffer and killing them outright. And she'd documented every step, proud of her precision. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison. The judge called it one of the most disturbing cases of child abuse he'd ever presided over in 30 years on the bench. My mother showed no remorse, not even when given the chance to speak. Even in court, even after everything, she looked at me with pity, with that same disappointed expression, like I was the one who didn't understand. Like I was failing my children by protecting them from necessary pain. Like I was the fool. I haven't spoken to her since the sentencing 2 years ago. She writes me letters from prison, long, rambling, 10-page screeds about generational strength and necessary suffering and how I'm raising my children to be weak, how I'm failing them, how they'll thank her someday when they're strong enough to survive what I couldn't protect them from. I burn them without reading past the first line. I don't need her words in my head anymore. I don't need her poison, literal or metaphorical. Emma's doing better now. The vomiting stopped the day we stopped seeing my mother. Her color came back within weeks. The gray tint around her mouth faded. She laughs again. Real laughs, not the nervous ones she used to make at Grandma's house. She's in therapy twice a week, working through the betrayal, the confusion of loving someone who hurt her. She asks me sometimes if Grandma ever really loved her. I tell her yes, in the only broken way she knew how. I don't know if that's the truth or a lie I tell to make it easier. Lucas's headaches are completely gone, vanished. He sleeps through the night now, 10 hours straight. No more nightmares about the special treats Grandma made just for him, the ones she'd watch him eat with such focused, intense attention, noting every swallow. He started to trust again, slowly. He hugs me without hesitation now. For a while after everything came out, he'd flinch when anyone touched him, even me. But they remember everything. They ask questions I don't always know how to answer, questions that break my heart. Why did Grandma hurt us? Did we do something wrong? Were we bad? Did she hate us? I tell them the truth, as gently as I can. That sometimes people we love are sick in ways we can't see, in ways that make them hurt the people they claim to love. That what happened wasn't their fault, could never be their fault. That they're safe now, and they always will be. That I'll never let anyone hurt them again. James and I are in therapy together, marriage counseling to deal with the aftermath. So are the kids, separately and as a family. We're rebuilding trust in ourselves, in our judgment, in our ability to protect them. Some days are harder than others. Some days are impossible. Some days I still see my mother's face in that garden, calmly explaining why she poisoned my children, and I can't breathe. Some days I can't believe I didn't see it sooner, and the guilt threatens to swallow me whole. Last month, I got a call from the prison medical unit. My mother had a stroke, a severe one. She's in the medical wing now, unable to speak, partially paralyzed on her left side. They asked if I wanted to visit, if I wanted to be notified of changes in her condition, if I wanted to be listed as next of kin. I said no to everything. James thought I should go, for closure, to say goodbye if it comes to that. But I don't need closure. I need distance. I need to keep my children away from her, even in her diminished state, even if she can't hurt them anymore. Because every time I close my eyes, I see her in that garden, smiling, telling me she was teaching them, making them strong. And I wonder how many times I fed my children poison with my own hands, serving them grandma's cookies, her special soup, her homemade bread, her fruit smoothies, praising her for being so good with them. How many times did I hand them their own suffering and call it a treat? Call it love? Call it family? The kids are playing in the backyard right now. I can hear them laughing, shrieking with joy. Emma's teaching Lucas how to do a cartwheel, and he keeps falling over and giggling, trying again. The sound of their happiness is everything. It's proof that we survived, that they survived her, that love doesn't have to hurt,